We are in Esther chapter 5, and before we continue in Esther chapter 5, let me just set the scene again so that we have a clear understanding where chapter 5 is coming from. It all started with Esther chapter 3. Esther chapter 3 in verse 8, if you remember, Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people, right? And then he described them as scattered, dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from other people's, and they do not keep the king's laws. And so it is not fitting for the king to let them remain. If it pleases the king, let a decree be written so that they may be destroyed. Now, if that is the case, I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who do the work to bring it into the king's treasury. Verse 10, so the king took a signet ring from the hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. Okay? And so we talked about Agag, right? Agag would be in 1 Samuel chapter 15, when Saul was supposed to kill King Agag and did not, and then Samuel killed him instead. And this would be the descendants of King Agag. Now, one of the things that I wanted to point out to you is this. When he said a certain people, this is a no-name people. Of course, we know they are the Jews, right? But it was not named to King Ahasuerus. King Ahasuerus trusted Haman, so this decree was set up without the king realizing that he had made a decree against the Jews. Now we come back to chapter 5. And then it happened on the third day. I want us to remember what happened to count to the third day. So just remember these words, on the third day. And we will turn to Esther chapter 4. What I want to point out to you is that in Esther chapter 4, at the end of Esther chapter 4, reading from verse 15, then Esther told them to reply Mordecai, go gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan, fast for me, neither eat or drink for 3 days. So we talk about 3 days, night or day. My mates and I will fast likewise, and I will go to the king, which is against the law. If I perish, I perish. And that was what happened. So 3 days, night or day, they're supposed to do that. And so on the third day, how do you count the days? This was what Esther told Mordecai. 3 days, right? Day 1, day 2, day 3. You need to fast. No water, no food. And so Esther spoke 3 days, and they count 1, 2, 3. And this is what it means, on the third day. So they counted 1, 2, and on the third day. And so one of the things about Jewish counting is that 3 days does not have to be 72 hours. It is part of this day and part of this day, and hence you have 1, 2, and 3. That's how you count days. And so this is where we continue in chapter 5. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes. This would be the clothes that she would wear, or you could call it the royal dignitary, right? Royal dignitary. what does it mean? It means this. These are special garments that you wear when you see the king. I think in today's terms, when you go and see the Agong, you also have to put on protocol. And these would be their protocol. To go and see King Ahasuerus, that would be the protocol. And what she did was she didn't go in to see the king, because the law is this. If you are not requested, you cannot go and see the king. And if you go and the king does not hand out his scepter and allow you to see him, you will die. And that is how serious going to see the king uninvited is. At the same time, you should also know that when the king invites you, that's the honor and privilege. But Queen Vashti decided not to go, and hence she was banished. Now, according to some Jewish rabbinical teaching, they suspect that Queen Vashti was killed. But that's another story. So now we are saying this. She stood in the inner court of the king's palace, across from the king's house, while the king sat on his throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house. Now, how might that look like? It might look like this. This would be the outer court, and this would be the throne. And this is the throne. This is the outer court. And this is the king's house, right? And this is the main door. So you can see that. And basically, this is where we are. And this is where the king was seated. And this is where the queen was. And so he could see, because he was looking across to his house. So that is where we know, or we think, right? This is my illustration of the text. And so you can't go in to see the king until the king says so. Now, carrying on from this topic, so it was. So you can see here, so it was. When the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, remember, he was seated in his throne, he was looking out, facing the entrance of the house, and there in between, Queen Esther was there. Now, I want you to take a look at this again, and this keeps repeating itself in the Old Testament. She found favor in his sight. Remember, grace. Grace is finding favor, right? Finding favor in the eyes of the powerful. Because you want something from that person. So grace is always seen this way. And we saw that in Genesis chapter 6, verse 8, right? And Noah found grace in the sight of God. So grace is always what the king sees, or what God sees. And when it pleases God, then it allows then favor and gifts and requests to be made. So this is important for us to see, and this is where grace comes in. So the Old Testament of grace is very clear, that you need to be able to see that grace is not just blind gifts, but it is a reward where the beholder sees and finds comfort, is pleased, is happy. Now, what you can see is this. The king is happy, right? And so she found favor, which is grace, in the eyes of the king. Everything is about the eyes of the beholder. And the king is the powerful person. And so the king extended out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. And this is grace shown. And so first of all, Esther must find grace or favor in the sight of the king. So the king is happy with her. In whatever way that may be, she has met the heart of the king, and the king is pleased. And in return, the king extended and showed what grace is to Esther. And so that's where we see. And Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter, and by that symbolic, accepted by the king, right? Accepted by the king. So grace itself is not complete. Grace is the entire picture. King is happy with Esther for whatever he sees in her. And in return, as a reaction, the king extends the scepter. And then only Esther could touch the top of the scepter, symbolically to be accepted by the king, that she do not need to be executed. Verse 3, the king said to her, "What do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, up to half the kingdom." And the king was very generous. He said, "Just tell me." The king was that happy with Esther. Now remember Hebrews 11:6, for it is impossible to please God, for he who comes to him must believe that he is, and that he's a rewarder of those that diligently seek him. Hebrews 11:6. Same idea. The king is now very pleased, very happy with Esther. And so grace was in his eyes, and he extends grace to Esther and says, "Tell me what you want, and it will be given you." And that is the grace. And so Esther understands this whole process. Grace is not, "Oh God, oh king, just give me your grace." Grace does not extend like that. Grace must first be seen in the eyes of the giver. And hence the giver now is happy with Esther and extends to Esther his grace, which is seen here. Verse 4. Verse 4 says this, Esther answered, "If it pleases the king." So you notice this word, right? The word is please. Verse 4, if the king is happy. What do you mean the king is happy? If the king thinks that this is good. So the English uses the word "if it pleases the king," but actually the word means if the king feels it is good. Now you know what good is, right? Good is tov. And good is an abstract term. Good in concrete terms means if it works according to what the king so desires, that's good, right? If it works along the king's intent, that is good. And so it says, if this works according to what the king is happy with, he desires, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him. And that was all Esther said. Verse 5. The king said, "Bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said." You see, the king treats Esther as a very important person. But even then, nobody can come to see the king unless the king calls for the person. But here you can see, Esther and the king has grace. The king, being powerful, extends grace to Esther and covers her. And essentially, whatever she wants to do, the king will be happy. And so the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared them. This one, I think it may be somewhere else and not near the throne. Verse 6, at the banquet of wine now. In the Persian Empire, all these banquets are always about wine. The king said to Esther, what is your petition? It shall be granted you. What is your request? Up to half the kingdom, it shall be done. And so the king was very happy with Esther. Verse 7, then Esther answered, my petition and request is this. Again, you notice, this is to make doubly sure. So Esther is doubly sure. If I have found favor in the sight of the king, right? If I have found favor in the sight of the king, that is grace. And if it pleases the king, you remember what pleases? If it's good, if it works to the desire of the king to grant my request and fulfill my request. So all I want you to see is this is Esther, and the way she asks is two-pronged. 1, 2. This both is the same. It's the same, right? First, grace in the eyes of the king. 2, pleases the king. You see that? It's the same thing. If that is the case, then grant my petition and my request. But now, come to the banquet again. Tomorrow I will do as the king has said. What about this that Esther is going to tell the king? My petition. What does Esther want about this particular petition? She will reveal tomorrow. So all you can see is from verse 4 to verse 7, the most important word that you can see is grace. Grace. And it pleases the king, right? It's good to the king. Now, moving on in verse 9. After the banquet, and that day was joyful and with a glad heart. Why? Because I think he had a lot of wine, right? It was a banquet of wine. Haman went out and saw Mordecai in the king's gate. It looks like Mordecai is forever at the king's gate. But when Haman went by, Mordecai did not stand or tremble before him. And so Haman was filled with indignation against Mordecai. He was very angry. So in verse 9, the word indignation, I think you can say that, how should we say? He is full of anger, full of heat, right? Full of anger. Is full of displeasure. Or anger, right? He was very angry with Mordecai. And so nevertheless, Haman restrained himself, don't want to upset, because you cannot touch anyone without the king. And so he went back and called his friends and his wife Zeresh. Now, we don't know what this means, but what it can mean, it might mean gold, right? It might mean gold, but this is a Persian name anyways, right? Esther is a Persian name. Zeresh is a Persian name. Haman is a Persian name. Verse 11, then Haman told them of his great riches. Oh, we've got lots of money. The multitude of his children. Everything in which the king had promoted him. And he was very boastful, very proud. Says, well, I got promotion before everybody else. And how he had advanced him above all the officials and the king's servants. And he was even more thrilled. The Haman said, besides this, you know, Queen Esther has invited no one but me to come in with the king to the banquet she had prepared. Now, understand this. Haman knows that King and Queen Esther are very close. And if this was a banquet that the queen put out and invited the king and only Haman came, obviously Haman felt so special that nobody else in the king's court could even attend this banquet, and said, tomorrow I am again invited by her along with the king. And he was very thrilled. Yet all this avails me nothing. Why? Because I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate, and it upsets him so much. You can see that Haman really hates Mordecai. Mordecai being a Jew and not respectful of him, a Persian. Now, in the last segment of chapter verse 14, his wife Zeresh and all his friends said this, let a gallows be made. Now, this is important to see, right? First, let me explain his friends. By friends, you need to realize that this is not the normal word for friends. This is with reference to all who loved Haman. So Haman has power. These are the ones who loved Haman. And so the English calls it his friends, but I don't think they're really like buddy friends. I think they are there because Haman is in power and has been promoted, and everybody wants to stick to him. Okay? Now, gallows. Very interestingly, you may ask, what is this gallows? Right? Gallows. The word gallows is from the Hebrew word etz, right? Etz. Etz refer to a tree. It refers to tree, wood. I guess you can say that is a pole, right? You know how tree is, like it goes straight up. So this part would be called, the hard part defines the tree. And so the gallows would probably look like a tree, or it's also called a tree in Hebrew. It's one tall piece that hangs out, okay? And from there, you find that there is the rope, a noose. So this is called the tree because it's straight up, right? Let a tree be made 50 cubits high. Now you must realize 50 cubits is very high. 50 cubits would be almost 25 feet, right? This is about 25 feet. And what does this mean? Why do you need to know the height? Because this is very prominent. It is very high up so that it will make a spectacle of Mordecai. That when he is hanged, everyone can see it. It is not hidden. That's what it means by 50 cubits high. And so they said, you know, in the morning, you will go to the king and suggest that Mordecai be hanged on it. And then after that, go to the banquet. No wonder this is called his friends, because these are the friends that's going to kill him. These are friends by definition, not so much as bosom buddies, but with the word, those who love him. And the thing pleased Haman. What does please mean? Remember, please is good to Haman. He hears it that, wow, this is exactly what I have intended. That's why it pleased him. But the real word is good. It was good to Haman. So you notice that in this chapter, we've seen a few of the Hebrew concepts where please actually means good. Good actually means it is working as it is intended. So what is bad? Well, bad is not happening the way that it was supposed to. Okay, so the thing was good to Haman, so he had the gallows made. And notice the gallows is only made overnight, literally that same day. Because the next day we will see in chapter 6, maybe tomorrow. We are at the end of chapter 5. Any questions?
The measurement is, in my Bible, is 75 feet tall.
Wow, 50 cubits.
Oh, okay.
75
So
feet.
sorry.
But the Hebrew is 50 cubits.
High.
Yes. Oh, my mistake. So let me just fix this.
So
My mistake.
75.
This would be 50 cubits.
Yeah, 22.5 meters.
Probably about 75 feet to about 85 feet tall. Okay? 75 feet to 85 feet tall. Sorry, my mistake. Not 25.
Wow, 使咩咁高啊？
50 cubits, you must look at a cubit. The cubit is from the elbow, right?
Mm.
So this is how you find the cubit. Remember when we did Genesis? From here to here. This is a cubit. So the general cubit is between 15 to, not 15, sorry. 15 inches to 20 inches. Depending on the official cubit, right?
Oh.
So if it's 15 inches, you would have something like 60 over feet high, 60, 70 feet high. So you get this type of height, which means that it is a very high gallows or tree, right? Remember, this is actually the same word, tree.
哇，75 feet 好高喎。
This is
No, no,
really
oh.
to make a spectacle out of the
Yeah.
out of Mordecai.
哦，係咯，依家要高啊，就。嗱，你有冇知道寫乜75 feet 嘛嗰度 ？Esther 540。
75, yeah. NLT says
About-
75 feet.
about only.
But basically, it's not exactly in that sense, but it would be around there if you look at the cubits. So what cubits were they using? Okay, bye.
Thanks, Thanks, Pastor.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone, too.